She was patient, too patient, the kind of woman who swallows her instincts because love tells her to. For years she watched, smiled, stayed quiet, until one evening she came home and found her husband moving his things into another woman's bedroom. That's when something inside her went cold. What she did next left both of them standing in the driveway with nowhere to go. But the real shock, the one nobody saw coming, didn't happen until weeks later. When the truth finally crawled out, it rewrote everything. This is the kind of story people delete, the kind you're not supposed to hear. If you're still here, it's not a coincidence. We're going to find out together what someone tried very hard to keep quiet. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. So here's the thing. I'm 28. My husband just turned 30. We've been married 4 years now, together for 7 total, 3 years of dating before we ever walked down the aisle. And honestly, for the most part, everything between us was solid, like genuinely good, except for one thing, one person, actually, his so-called best friend. Her name is Nora. Now, Nora isn't just some college buddy or a work acquaintance. No. This woman has been glued to my husband since before either of them could form full sentences. They grew up next door to each other. Same preschool, same elementary school, same middle school, same high school. They even ended up at the same college. Different majors, sure, but still. Everywhere he went, she was right there beside him. And trust me, I could never forget that little detail, even if I wanted to, because the two of them bring it up every single chance they get. Every gathering, every dinner, every casual conversation. It always circles back to some childhood memory they just have to relive out loud. The only time they actually went their separate ways was when careers pulled them in different directions. And that's exactly when I came into the picture. I met my husband during that window, but even from a distance, Nora made sure I knew my place. She told me once, with this little smile on her face, like it was the most adorable joke, that I was the third most important woman in my husband's life. His mother came first, she came second, and then, way down the list, there was me. She delivered it like a punchline, but I guarantee you she meant every syllable. Deep down, I always felt like she resented me, like I was someone who'd wandered into territory she considered hers. When my husband first introduced us, he called her his oldest friend, and I went in with an open heart. Tried to be warm, tried to be kind. And what did I get back? She immediately mocked how much makeup I was wearing and told me I didn't need to try so hard to impress her. That set the tone for everything that followed. Constant little jabs about my appearance. My lipstick was too much, my outfit was trying too hard, my hair was whatever she decided to critique that day. And then there were those backhanded compliments designed to leave you feeling small without being able to point to anything specific. One time she flat out told me my husband had a thing for dumb blondes. I'm blonde, by the way, so yeah, you get the picture. I tried bringing this up with him, multiple times actually, even before we got married. Told him something about Nora felt off, that my gut was screaming at me, but he brushed it aside every single time. Same speech on repeat. She's just blunt, she doesn't have a filter, most women can't handle her honesty, basically throwing every other woman under the bus just to make Nora look like some kind of misunderstood straight shooter. Looking back, that alone should have been a massive red flag, but at the time, I was so wrapped up in him that I let it slide. Because apart from the Nora situation, this man was everything I'd ever wanted. Smart, funny, magnetic. He made me feel loved. He made me feel chosen. So I swallowed my discomfort and told myself I could handle her. And eventually, I kind of did. I built up walls, stopped letting her barbs land, learned to tune her out. Things actually got easier when she started seeing someone. 4 years back, Nora matched with this guy Gavin on a dating app, and within a year, they were engaged. She was absolutely head over heels, like consumed by this man. And from what I could tell, The feeling was mutual. Personally, I thought a single year was nowhere near enough time to truly know somebody, especially when they hadn't even lived together long enough to see each other at their worst. But Nora and I weren't close, and I knew if I so much as hinted at my concerns, she'd blow up in my face. So I kept quiet and mentioned it to my husband instead, hoping he'd gently nudge her towards slowing things down. Fat chance. He was thrilled. Couldn't stop gushing about how amazing it was that he and Nora were engaged around the same time and might even have their weddings back to back. They actually floated the idea of a joint ceremony, which I shut down immediately. Told him Nora and I had completely different visions for a wedding, and there was no way I was merging the two. Thankfully, she didn't push it. She married Gavin about a month after our wedding, and life was peaceful. For a while. Then, roughly 5 months ago, Nora confided in my husband that she'd been struggling to conceive. She and Gavin had been trying for close to 6 months with nothing to show for it, so they went in for testing. The results came back, devastating. Nora was infertile, and from that moment on, her marriage started crumbling. They tried counseling, but it didn't matter because Gavin filed for divorce anyway. He decided he didn't want to spend his life with a woman who couldn't give him biological children. Cold? Absolutely. And despite everything Nora had put me through, I genuinely felt sorry for her. She started showing up at our place constantly after that, way more than before, and I tolerated it because how do you turn away someone who's falling apart? Every visit was the same. She'd walk through the door already in tears, and my husband would spend the whole time trying to hold her together. Getting angry at a person drowning in that kind of pain felt almost impossible, especially because I could see she'd truly been in love with Gavin. Then the divorce proceedings kicked in. Asset negotiations, mandatory meetings, all of it forcing her to keep seeing the man who was leaving her. It broke her down even further. That's when my husband came to me and asked if Nora could stay with us for a bit. Just temporarily, he said, just until she stabilized, because apparently being around him was the only thing that made her feel halfway normal anymore. That was almost 2 weeks ago. And the second I agreed to let her through my front door, I regretted it. She criticized absolutely everything. My cooking wasn't good enough. Our furniture was wrong. My taste in shows was beneath her. And none of it had consequences because, well, she was depressed, wasn't she? So everything in our house had to revolve around her. Whatever Nora wanted, Nora got, because according to my husband, that's what she needed right now. I told him more than once that I wanted her gone, that if she hated everything about our home so much, she could pack up and move back in with her parents. But every time, he'd beg me to let her stay. His argument? He was terrified she might do something reckless if we kicked her out while she was this fragile, and that kept me quiet, because I didn't want that on my conscience. I didn't want to carry that weight if something happened. So I bit my tongue, swallowed my frustration, and kept going, until 2 days ago, when they finally crossed every line there was left to cross. I came home from work and found my husband hauling his belongings out of our bedroom, and into the guest room, Nora's room. He'd left work early specifically to get this done before I got back, but he didn't finish in time because when I walked in, the two of them were still mid-move, carrying his stuff down the hall like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood there, stunned, and asked him if we could talk privately. He said no. Whatever I had to say, I could say it right there in front of Nora, and here's what killed me. For the first time in weeks, she actually looked happy, like genuinely cheerful. I asked him why exactly he was relocating to the guest room, and without a single trace of hesitation or shame, he told me he'd be sleeping in Nora's room from now on, sharing a room with her. I literally froze. My brain couldn't process what I was hearing. When I finally managed to ask what the hell was going on, he explained, calm as anything, that Nora had been having severe panic attacks for several days straight and needed someone beside her at night to comfort her when she woke up in a spiral over the divorce. I immediately told him absolutely not, that he'd completely lost his mind if he thought for 1 second I'd be okay with this. And out came the greatest hit, the line I'd heard 1,000 times before. She's like a sister to him. I had nothing to worry about. Both of them just stood there, smiling at me like that smile was supposed to make this whole situation perfectly reasonable. I was so furious, so utterly gutted that my hands were shaking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But instead, something shifted inside me. My rage hit a frequency so high it actually went cold. Calculated. I smiled right back at them, told them I completely understood, that it was all totally fine with me. My husband even had the audacity to say he knew I'd come around, and they happily went back to setting up their little arrangement. Meanwhile, I walked into the master bedroom and pulled out the property documents. See, this house was a gift from my father. He gave it to me when I landed my very first job, and it's titled solely in my name. Legally, entirely mine. Once I had those papers in hand, I strolled back to the guest room with the sweetest smile I could manage and asked if they were all done unpacking. They said yes. And I said, great, now start packing again, because very soon you'll both be out on the street, where you can play house to your heart's content. My husband's face went blank. He couldn't compute what was happening until I held up the deed and spelled it out for him. This is my house, my name, my property, and I am done being humiliated under my own roof. He laughed nervously, thinking I was bluffing. But when he realized I wasn't cracking even the ghost of a smile, his tone changed fast. He said I was being ridiculous, that I couldn't just throw them out like that. I told him I absolutely could, and in fact I already was, so arguing was a waste of his breath. I told him he made me sick, and Nora made me sicker, because at this point she'd become some unbearable hybrid of a drama queen and a professional victim, and I was done tolerating either version. Nora, right on cue, burst into tears. My husband jumped to her defense and accused me of being jealous of her, said I'd always envied her because of my own insecurities. And you know what? I didn't even deny it. Because it's true. I have been insecure. But the source of that insecurity wasn't some flaw in me. It was the twisted dynamic between the two of them. I told them both, point blank, that if they couldn't function without each other, they had no business dragging other people into relationships just to destroy their lives. The way they destroyed mine. A vicious argument erupted after that, but when the dust settled, they left. On his way out, my husband said he felt insulted, that he'd loved me, and somehow that was never enough. Nora was still sobbing and threw one last accusation at me, that I was cruel and consumed by jealousy. I didn't respond. I had nothing left. I just needed them gone. I thought that would be the end of it. I really believed once they walked out that door, my problems would walk out with them. I was wrong. Almost immediately, mutual friends, people who had never once shown the slightest interest in our marriage, started flooding my phone. Message after message telling me I was blowing things out of proportion, that my husband was just trying to support Nora through a medical crisis, that panic attacks are serious, and instead of showing compassion, I'd turned everything into a spectacle driven by my own insecurities. Every single message read like it was copied from the same script. Because it was. He'd coached them, obviously. I tried to ignore the avalanche, but then he pulled in reinforcements, his entire family. Suddenly everyone was united in the opinion that I was a monster for throwing them out during Nora's darkest hour, that I was heartless, that I didn't deserve a husband as devoted as him, that it had been obvious from the start I was never good enough for him. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that was partly why Nora had always felt like such a threat, because a small, broken part of me believed they might be right. I realized fighting back was pointless, So I blocked every single one of them. For my own sanity, not a single person in that entire crowd had stopped for even a moment to consider what I might be feeling. They didn't care. Their concern started and ended with my husband and Nora. I thought the blocking would bring peace. I was already gearing up to file for divorce. But then he found another way in. Texted me from a different number, saying he was still willing to come back if I apologized. Same old script, one more time. Nora was the sister he never had. He'd never once felt anything romantic toward her. I'd misread the whole thing. He cared about her, sure, he even loved her. But it was platonic, brotherly, nothing like what he felt for me. He said the thought of living without me was destroying him, that walking out that day had been a mistake. But, and here's where it gets rich, he also believed I'd overreacted, that I'd misread the entire situation. He wanted me to step back, cool down, and really think about the consequences of what I was doing, because he didn't want me making a rash decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. He was willing to come back and rebuild everything, on one condition. We both apologize, mutual accountability for what he kept calling a misunderstanding. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with that, because in my mind, I hadn't gone too far. Nothing about my reaction felt disproportionate, but his message got under my skin in a way I wasn't expecting. Suddenly, I was second-guessing everything. Maybe divorcing him was a mistake. Maybe I was the one who'd blown things out of proportion. He kept hammering on the same point. Nora was a sister to him, nothing more. And the repetition started doing its job. It chipped away at my certainty. I actually caught myself wondering whether I'd been wrong to throw my own husband out for wanting to share a room with his lifelong friend during her mental health crisis. Was I really that unreasonable? Was I the villain here? But then something happened. People started responding to what I'd shared, and their words hit like cold water on a sleeping face. Turns out I'd been blind. Completely, embarrassingly blind. Reading through those responses ripped the fog away, and I finally saw what I'd been too deep in to recognize. I had lost all sense of where the boundaries should have been. My marriage was already in ruins. And looking back with clear eyes, I should have drawn the line on his relationship with Nora years ago. Even if it meant losing him back then, at least I wouldn't be going through a divorce because of her now. How did I let it spiral this far? The answer is painfully simple. I loved him too much. Maybe I still do. That's exactly why I was seriously considering forgiveness, seriously entertaining the idea of taking him back. In my defense, this man is persuasive. For years, he'd been conditioning me to believe their friendship was perfectly normal and that my discomfort was a personal failing. He gaslit me relentlessly, made me question my own instincts over and over again until I didn't trust them anymore. Years of that kind of manipulation, and it all finally detonated when he decided to move into her room. That was the breaking point, the one thing even his words couldn't undo. My parents have been behind me through all of this. They agree the divorce is the right call, and they're right. What's been done can't be undone. He can't unscramble those words, and deep down, I know he'll never cut Nora loose. Not for me, not for anyone. A few days passed. I never replied to his message. I have no idea where he and Nora are staying now, and frankly, I don't want to know, because every possible answer would make me feel worse. What I do know is this. I deserve someone who puts me first. My husband never did. I spent years being a fool, clinging to the hope that one day he'd choose me over her. But that day was never coming, and the kindest thing I can do for myself is walk away. I filed for divorce. The papers should reach him any day now. Now here's where it gets interesting. He was served a week later, and to my surprise, he chose not to contest it. You'd think that would be the end of the conversation, right? If you're not going to fight for the marriage in court, what's left to say? But no. He showed up at my door the very next evening to tell me how deeply disappointed he was that I was throwing everything away over something so trivial. I didn't expect him, especially not after how things ended the last time, but he said he needed to collect some of his things, and I had to let him in. Once he'd gathered what he came for, he sat down across from me on the couch and said he wanted to talk. I didn't speak, just waited. He repeated that he wouldn't fight the divorce if that's what I truly wanted. But he needed me to understand I was making a terrible mistake, that I was the only woman he'd ever loved, and the mere suggestion that he could have been unfaithful genuinely offended him, especially with Nora. He told me they were both staying at his parents' place now, and his whole family was devastated by my decision to end things over what they all considered nonsense. Apparently, his mother had wanted to come talk to me herself after the papers arrived, but he'd stopped her. Out of respect for my choice, he claimed, and because he didn't want to pressure me through relatives. That one almost made me laugh. Respect? This was the same man who'd orchestrated a coordinated campaign to guilt me into submission. I couldn't help myself. I called him out on it, and you could see the panic flash across his face. He denied everything, insisted the messages from our friends were spontaneous and heartfelt, that he had absolutely nothing to do with them. But I'm not stupid. I pulled up those texts right in front of him. Every single one was practically identical. Same phrasing, same guilt trips, same structure. Someone had clearly dictated what to say, and they'd all just copy-pasted it into their message threads. His denials meant nothing against that kind of evidence. He'd already tried cornering me once, and it hadn't worked. This was simply the next play in his rotation. When he realized I wasn't buying it, he tried to redirect, started talking about how brutal the past few days had been, knowing the marriage was really ending. Then came the tears, full-on sobbing on my couch, telling me life would never be the same without me, that he spent every waking moment trying to figure out how to fix this. The whole performance was already unconvincing, but the crying? That pushed it into absurd territory. I felt absolutely nothing for him in that moment. Zero sympathy, and the first thing that came out of my mouth after his whole speech about wanting to make things right. I told him that maybe, just maybe, I'd reconsider the divorce. On one condition. He promises to never see Nora again. Ever. That stopped him dead. The tears dried up almost instantly. And then we just stood there, locked in this heavy, suffocating silence, each waiting for the other to blink first. Now let me be crystal clear about something. I had zero intention of staying married to this man, regardless of what came out of his mouth next. Even if he'd sworn on everything sacred that he'd cut Nora off completely, I was still walking away. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a test, and he failed it spectacularly. Because of course, he didn't agree. Instead, he launched into the exact same monologue I'd been forced to sit through in every single argument we'd ever had about their friendship. She was his oldest companion, she was like a sister. He couldn't abandon her, especially not now when she was going through the worst chapter of her life. That would be heartless. But apparently leaving me, his actual wife, the woman he'd made vows to, that was perfectly acceptable. I couldn't stomach another round of his justifications for why Nora deserved his loyalty more than I did, so I cut him off mid-sentence. I told him this was exactly why I was leaving. He'd just been handed a choice, his marriage or his friendship, and he'd picked her. Again. Which meant he could never claim I didn't give him a fair shot. He could never say I overreacted or didn't try. I'd laid it all on the table, and he'd shown me exactly where I stood. He had nothing, not a single word. He just got up and walked out. All that was left now was waiting for the legal machinery to grind forward. A few weeks crawled by before we saw each other again, this time inside a courtroom. Our state requires a minimum 6-month waiting period before a divorce can be finalized, so we were just at the beginning of a long road. After the hearing, my husband approached me outside and said he was prepared to wait out every single one of those 6 months if there was even a chance I'd come back to him. I was genuinely baffled. Weeks of silence. No contact whatsoever. I'd assumed there was nothing left between us worth discussing. Yet here he was, still trying to bridge a gap I'd already walked away from. I asked him one simple question. Was he still living with Nora? He couldn't answer, just silence. I rolled my eyes and turned toward my car. That's when he blurted out that Nora couldn't go back to her parents because her mother was impossible to live with, and blamed Nora for the divorce. Held her responsible for being unable to have children. That, he explained, was why she'd come to us in the first place, and why she'd moved to his parents' house after I kicked them out. And look, I understood that on some level I should probably feel sorry for her. But mustering compassion for someone who'd spent years making me feel worthless, someone who'd ultimately detonated my marriage, that was asking too much. I told him through the car window that Nora had plenty of other friends, including single ones who'd happily take her in. The real issue was that he refused to acknowledge their dynamic was broken. We were getting divorced because of it. And still, even now, he couldn't bring himself to admit that moving her into our home had been completely unnecessary. We argued again, and honestly, that final blow-up only confirmed how foolish I'd been to ever entertain the thought of giving us another chance. This relationship had cost me everything. Friends, my peace of mind, serious money, because Nora had lived under my roof rent-free, and now I was shelling out for a lawyer on top of it. Absolute madness. The amount I'd been willing to forgive simply because I loved this man, while he couldn't even love me enough to admit that bringing Nora into our home was a mistake. His stubbornness when it came to her was beyond irrational. And you know what? I think the divorce is the best thing that could have happened. Now he's free to be with the woman he truly cares about, and he can stop wasting my time. I just hope he figures that out soon and quits chasing me. And then, just when I thought this story couldn't get any wilder, something absolutely unhinged happened. I still can't wrap my head around the things my husband said about Nora. We'd only seen each other days earlier, and I never expected him to resurface this quickly. But yesterday, he showed up to do something I genuinely never believed he was capable of. He admitted he'd been wrong. About everything. He apologized. He owned every single mistake. I'm sitting here still processing the fact that those words actually left his mouth, that he finally recognized how badly he'd messed up, and that Nora had been working against me the entire time. I'd gotten home from work and was going about my evening when suddenly someone started hammering on my front door like the house was on fire. I opened it, and he blew past me before I could even get a word out. One look at his face told me he was completely unraveled. My first instinct was that he'd come to start a fight, and I was already mentally dialing the police to have him removed from my property. But then he started crying. And this time it was real. Not the theatrical performance from his last visit. These were raw, ugly, broken-down tears. Whatever wall I'd built came down just enough for me to try and calm him, because at the end of the day, I'm still human. I'm not someone who can watch another person fall apart and just stand there with crossed arms. Even if it had been Nora herself, I would have done the same. After a while, he pulled himself together enough to talk. He told me he'd taken the day off work and spent it alone at home, spiraling over the divorce. And then Nora walked into his room, supposedly to comfort him. Except comfort wasn't what she had in mind. She started flirting with him. That had never happened before, not once in all the years they'd known each other. He tried to push her away, told her he wasn't in the mood for jokes, but she didn't back off. She pressed herself closer, and that was the moment something finally snapped into place for him. He drew the line, hard, and in that split second, everything I'd been saying for years landed. Every warning, every gut feeling, every argument he'd dismissed. It all crashed down on him at once. He realized I'd been right about her from the very beginning, because even though he had genuinely, honestly only ever seen her as a friend, practically a sibling, She had been angling for something more this entire time, operating under a completely different understanding of what they were. The confrontation that followed was brutal. Nora accused him of leading her on for years, stringing her along, letting her believe there was something between them, and then betraying her by marrying me. She called him a traitor, and then, just like that, she packed her bags and went back to her parents' house, the same mother she supposedly couldn't stand, the same environment she'd called unbearable. Funny how quickly that became an option once the mask came off. So there he was, standing in my living room, telling me I'd been right about absolutely everything, that he was sorry for taking me for granted, that he didn't deserve a woman like me, that maybe, just maybe, this divorce would be the wake-up call he needed to finally get his head straight. We sat and talked for a while after that. Really talked. Cleared the air in a way we probably should have done a long time ago. And I came to understand something important. He hadn't been lying all those times he swore he only loved me and saw Nora as nothing more than a sister. He truly believed that. He just couldn't see what was obvious to everyone else. Did that change my mind about the divorce? No, not even close. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't lift something heavy off my chest. Knowing the truth, knowing that my instincts had been solid all along, that I hadn't been paranoid or jealous or crazy, that brought a kind of peace I didn't expect. We're still going through with it. The marriage is over, but we're going to try and end this thing on decent terms. No more screaming matches, no more manipulation, just two people untangling their lives as gracefully as they can manage. I really hope we pull that off. So that's where things stand. I'd love to hear what you all think about this entire saga. Did she make the right call, going through with the divorce even after he finally came around? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for sticking with this one all the way through. I know it was a ride. Go check out our last video right over here, and as always, take care of yourselves out there.